Hey there, welcome back. Tonight, we're going to explore some of the strangest rulers in history. These were kings and emperors, sultans and czars, who held great power, but lived very unusual lives. They were not always bad rulers, and not always mad, but they all left behind stories that make historians pause, smile, or shake their heads. We'll begin in just a moment, but before we do, write in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I always love seeing how far our little circle of listeners reaches. And if you enjoy these calm, thoughtful stories, feel free to like or subscribe. It truly helps. Thank you. Now, let's begin tonight's story.
Our first strange ruler is one of the most famous, Nero Claudius Caesar, emperor of Rome from the year 54 to 68 AD. He came to power at just 16 years old. His mother, Agrippina the Younger, had worked tirelessly to place him on the throne. She married the Emperor Claudius, convinced him to adopt Nero as his son, and may have even poisoned him when the time came. At first, Nero was guided by capable advisors. The philosopher Seneca was one of them. For a few years, Rome was peaceful, but then Nero changed. He wanted more than power, he wanted applause. Nero dreamed of being a performer, not a warrior or ruler. He took lessons in singing, acting, and lyre playing. He performed in private at first, then in public. For Roman elites, this was shocking. An emperor on stage? It seemed undignified, but Nero didn't care. He forced senators to attend his long performances, and no one dared leave. Some reportedly faked fainting to escape. He also raced chariots, dressed like Greek athletes, and insisted on winning every prize. But stranger things happened. Nero became increasingly paranoid. He believed plots surrounded him. He had his own mother killed, fearing she had grown too powerful. He had his wife killed too. Then, in guilt or madness, he married a young boy who resembled her, and held a wedding ceremony in full. Some historians believe Nero set fire to Rome in 64 AD to clear land for a new palace. As the city burned, stories say he played the lyre and sang, though this may be a myth. What is true is that he built a massive golden palace in the ruins, complete with gardens, lakes, and a 100-foot-tall statue of himself. The Roman people were not impressed. Eventually, the army rebelled. Nero fled the city. Alone, frightened, he begged his few remaining followers to help him die. When they would not, he took his own life, saying, "What an artist dies in me." He was 30 years old. Today, we remember Nero as a strange figure, half emperor, half performer, a man who ruled the greatest empire of his time, but only wanted to hear the sound of clapping hands. Our next ruler is from colder lands. Paul I of Russia became emperor in 1796, after the death of his mother, Catherine the Great. He had waited a long time. His mother ruled for over 30 years and barely let him near power. She did not trust him. Some say she even considered skipping him in the line of succession. When she died, Paul finally took the throne. And that's when things got strange. At first, he tried to undo much of what his mother had done. He reversed policies, removed her advisors, and promoted new faces. But behind these changes was a man deeply nervous. Paul was obsessed with order, especially military discipline. He forced soldiers to wear old-fashioned uniforms, with tight trousers, high collars, and stiff jackets, the kind of outfit no one could breathe in, or sit down comfortably while wearing. One officer reportedly fainted from heat after hours of standing still. Paul's reply? He's lucky.
Now he doesn't have to follow orders. He also introduced strange military drills. Soldiers had to march in perfect circles, over and over, while Paul watched in silence. He once punished a whole regiment because a private sneezed during inspection. He even passed a rule banning the use of round tables because he thought they looked untrustworthy. Yes, round tables. At his palace, Paul had walls moved and rebuilt, sometimes more than once a week. He believed the layout of rooms could protect him from spies or ghosts. At night, he feared being murdered in his sleep. So he slept in different rooms, changed guards constantly, and checked under his bed himself. But paranoia doesn't always help. In 1801, a group of nobles, tired of his erratic orders and endless changes, stormed his palace. Paul tried to hide behind a curtain, but they found him, and his reign ended there, just 5 years after it began. His son, Alexander I, replaced him and ruled more calmly. But Paul remains one of Russia's most curious emperors, a man who wanted to bring order but ended up drowning in it.
Our next ruler was not violent nor cruel. He did not shout orders or fear betrayal. He simply disappeared into dreams. Ludwig II of Bavaria, born in 1845, was a shy and thoughtful man. He became king at just 18 years old. From the start, Ludwig had little interest in politics or war. He preferred poetry, music, and moonlight walks through the forest. He ruled during a time of change in Europe, when empires shifted and governments grew more modern. But Ludwig seemed untouched by time. He called himself the Moon King and lived as if he were in another world. Ludwig admired old stories, knights, dragons, and saints. He read tales of Parsifal and Lohengrin, ancient heroes from German myths. These stories meant more to him than Parliament ever did. He also loved music, especially the operas of Richard Wagner. He became Wagner's patron, giving him money, homes, and endless support. Some say the composer drained Bavaria's treasury, and Ludwig didn't mind. But Ludwig's greatest passion was building castles. He didn't build them for defense, he built them for beauty. The most famous is Neuschwanstein Castle, perched high in the mountains. It looks like something from a storybook. Towers, murals, gold leaf, endless balconies. But it wasn't meant to be lived in. It was a dream turned to stone. Inside, there were rooms dedicated to Wagner's operas. Paintings of swans, stars, and kings filled the halls. One room had a fake cave with colored lights and dripping water. He often dined alone, at a table lifted through the floor by a hidden mechanism, so he wouldn't see the servants. As the years passed, Ludwig withdrew further. He stopped attending meetings. He rarely spoke to ministers. He stayed awake at night and slept during the day. He traveled in sleighs under moonlight, wrapped in velvet and silence. Government officials grew uneasy. His building projects were draining the royal budget. One minister wrote, thoughtful, "He is not mad, but he is not fit to reign." Eventually, in 1886, doctors declared him insane, without ever examining him. They removed him from power. A few days later, Ludwig was found dead in a shallow lake. No one knows exactly how he died. Some say he drowned. Others believe there was a struggle. To this day, it remains one of Bavaria's quiet mysteries.
Ludwig left behind debts and confusion, but also castles that millions now visit each year.
Walt Disney was inspired by Neuschwanstein when designing his first theme park castle. And today, Ludwig is remembered with affection, not as a madman, but as a gentle dreamer who tried to build peace in a world of stone and silence.
Our next story takes us to the heart of the Ottoman Empire. to the city of Constantinople in the early 1600s. There, behind the marble walls of Topkapi Palace, lived a man named Ibrahim. He would become known as Ibrahim the Mad. But to understand him, we must first understand where he came from. Ibrahim was born in 1615. He was the son of an Ottoman sultan, but his early life was not a royal dream. In the Ottoman tradition, potential heirs to the throne were often kept in seclusion, a system known as the kafes, or the cage. It wasn't a literal cage, but it was close. Young princes lived in small apartments deep inside the palace. They were not allowed to leave. They had no official duties. They were watched constantly. The goal was to keep them safe and out of politics. But years in isolation can affect a person. Ibrahim spent over 20 years in the cage. He saw his brothers executed. He was told more than once that he would be next. Some say he began to lose touch with the world. In 1640, the Sultan died. Ibrahim's mother, Qasem, pulled him from the cage and declared him Sultan. At first, Ibrahim refused. He believed it was a trick to justify his execution. But eventually, he accepted the crown. He was paranoid, fragile, and unsure how to rule. His mother, a powerful figure, tried to guide him, but Ibrahim grew more independent and more erratic. Ibrahim's reign quickly became known for its bizarre behavior. He became obsessed with wealth and physical pleasures. He ordered rooms lined with fur, especially sable, which he believed gave him strength. He demanded large numbers of concubines and held extravagant ceremonies that shocked even the Ottoman court. One story claims he threw coins into the Bosphorus to see how they sparkled. Another says he tied jewels to cats just to watch them walk. He trusted fortune tellers and charlatans and once gave away entire provinces to friends as gifts. He reportedly became fixated on one woman in the harem, known as Shekerpare, or Sugar Cube, who held deep influence over him. Some historians believe he suffered from mental illness brought on by his early isolation. Others say he simply never learned how to rule. As his decisions grew more unstable, his mother Qasem and the high officials acted. In 1648, after just 8 years on the throne, Ibrahim was deposed. He was taken back to the palace and quietly executed. Ibrahim's story is a sad one, not of cruelty, but of a man never prepared for the world he inherited. A prince kept in silence, a sultan lost in shadows. His short reign is often remembered with embarrassment in Turkish history. But today, historians also see the pain behind the strangeness. Sometimes, the strangest rulers are also the most broken.
We return now to the city of Constantinople in the 6th century AD. The Roman Empire in the east, the Byzantine Empire, was still strong. Its palaces were grand, its armies vast, and its rulers divine in name. And seated upon its throne was Emperor Justin II. At first, he seemed like a promising leader. He was the nephew of Justinian the Great, one of Rome's most famous emperors. He inherited a strong empire and began his rule with purpose. But as the years passed, things began to change, quietly, then suddenly. Justin II took the throne in 565 AD. He tried to live up to his uncle's legacy, restoring laws, managing finances, expanding influence. But soon, his mind began to break under the weight of the empire. He was surrounded by pressure, wars on multiple fronts, religious conflicts in the Christian world, economic troubles left by earlier conquests. The stress built over time, and in his final years, something inside him seemed to snap. Historical records from court observers and chroniclers say that Justin began to hallucinate. He claimed to see demons in the corners of his chambers. He would scream uncontrollably, then laugh at nothing at all. He could no longer sleep.
He stopped attending council meetings, and his behavior became more alarming. He began to bite his servants. Yes, not symbolically, literally. Those closest to him reported that he would lunge forward, teeth bared, and bite aides or guards who came too close. Some had to wear thick clothing just to serve him. He could no longer trust his own mind. In a rare moment of clarity, Justin realized this. In 574 AD, he did something few rulers of his time ever dared. He formally handed power to a trusted general, Tiberius, who became co-emperor. It was an act of humility, and perhaps the last decision he made with reason. Justin lived 2 more years, under care, surrounded by guards, and silence. He died in 578, remembered not for his policies, but for the strange and tragic way his reign ended. Justin II is a lesser-known emperor today, but his story reminds us of something real. Even rulers, even emperors surrounded by gold and power, can suffer quietly. His strange behavior was likely a form of mental illness, worsened by isolation and unrelenting stress. In his time, there were no words for it, only whispers in the palace halls. This story takes us to medieval France in the 14th century, a time of knights and castles, of battles and black plagues, a time when kings ruled by divine right, and one king began to believe he might shatter. His name was Charles VI. He became king of France at just 11 years old, in the year 1380. At first, people called him Charles the Beloved. He was kind, well-liked, and showed promise. But over time, that title would change. He would later be remembered as Charles the Mad. Charles ruled during a time of great instability, wars with England, rivalries within France, and deep economic struggles. At age 24, something in him broke. During a journey through the forest with his guards, he suddenly turned and attacked his own men, believing they were traitors. He killed one and injured several others. Afterward, he fell into a deep, silent trance, refusing to speak or recognize anyone. It was the first of many such episodes. Charles would spend long stretches without memory. At times, he believed he was not king at all, and most famously, he believed he was made of glass. He wore reinforced clothing and refused to let anyone touch him. He would sit still for hours, fearing that if he moved too quickly, he would crack or shatter. He reportedly had iron rods sewn into his clothes to protect his body, like armor for a man not afraid of war, but of breaking. While Charles remained king, his condition made daily rule impossible. Power shifted constantly between nobles, factions, and even his wife and brother. France, meanwhile, slipped deeper into internal conflict, some of which would lead to the long and painful 100 Years' War. All the while, Charles drifted in and out of his illness. He had moments of clarity, brief windows when he recognized his children, his crown, and his kingdom, but they never lasted. In one odd episode, Charles forgot he had ever married. He asked his queen why she was still living in the palace. When told she was his wife, he became distressed and ran from her. Other times he offed uncontrollably or whispered to ghosts no one else could see. Charles lived with his illness for over 30 years. He died in 1422 at the age of 53. By that time, much of his kingdom had slipped from royal control. The English held parts of northern France. His own son had been exiled. But Charles left behind more than a broken crown. He left the story of a king, fragile, gentle, lost in his own mind, and a reminder that strength does not always lie in armor, and that even the most powerful rulers can be undone by something as quiet as fear. Let's begin with something simple. A question. How did the first people arrive in the Americas? The answer is quiet, steady, and deeply human. It began during the last ice age, around 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. At that time, large parts of the Earth were covered in ice. Sea levels were lower, and between what we now call Russia and Alaska, there was no ocean, only land. That land is called the Bering Land Bridge, or Beringia. It was not narrow or steep. It was wide, cold, windy, covered in grass and snow. It stretched hundreds of kilometers across the north, and it connected Asia to North America. People crossed it slowly, likely following large animals like mammoths or bison. These were hunter-gatherers, small groups of families moving together, searching for food, firewood, and shelter. They had stone tools, they knew how to build simple shelters, and they were deeply connected to the land. As the ice began to melt, the land bridge slowly disappeared underwater, but the people had already crossed. They were now living in what we call Alaska, and from there they continued to move south, over generations, over centuries. Some followed the coast, using small boats and fishing tools. Others moved inland, walking through forests, plains, and valleys. There were no borders, no names for the land, just open space, rivers, animals, and the quiet rhythm of survival. This movement is called migration, but it didn't happen in a single moment. It took thousands of years. People moved slowly, not to explore, but to live. They settled where there was water, warmth, and food. Today, archaeologists still find evidence of these early communities. In Canada, at the Bluefish Caves, animal bones with cut marks suggest human presence around 24,000 years ago. In Chile, the site of Monteverde shows signs of early life. Wooden tools, footprints, small shelters, possibly as early as 14,500 years ago. There are campsites, fire pits, tools, and bones, but no written language, no stone monuments. These people left no kings or buildings behind, only small signs that they were here. Over time, their descendants would spread across both continents. North, Central, and South America became home to thousands of unique cultures, each shaped by their climate, land, and traditions. But all of them share this one thing. They came from the same small groups who crossed the ice and walked into a new world. No conquest, no flag, just quiet determination and the will to survive. As time passed, those early families of hunter-gatherers began to settle more permanently. They planted seeds, they raised animals, they built homes from earth, stone, and wood. The pace of life changed. It became slower, more organized. And in time, these small communities grew into something larger. They became civilizations. Let's start in the north, in the central valleys near the Mississippi River. There, a culture arose that many people today have never heard of. It's called the Mississippian culture, and at its center was a city named Cahokia. Cahokia stood near what is now St. Louis in the United States. At its peak, around the year 1100, it may have had 20,000 people. That was a large city by medieval standards, larger than London at the same time. The people of Cahokia built large earthen mounds, carefully shaped into pyramids with flat tops. They used no metal tools, no wheels, only baskets, shovels, and strong hands. Some mounds were used for ceremonies. Others may have supported temples or homes of leaders. At the center of the city was a massive open plaza, a place for markets, games, or gatherings, and surrounding it were wooden fences and rows of houses. Trade reached far. From the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, objects moved: shells, stones, feathers, copper, and stories. And yet no one knows exactly why Cahokia eventually declined. By the 1400s, it had largely emptied out, But the earth mounds remain, silent, patient reminders of a world before maps. Now, let's move south into the highlands of Central America. This is where some of the most well-known ancient cultures lived: the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca. Though the Inca were in South America, and we'll get there in a moment. The Maya were thinkers, builders, astronomers. They lived in cities like Tikal, Palenque, and Copan, surrounded by thick jungle. They built tall stone pyramids and carved calendars into stone. They tracked the stars with great precision. Their writing system was complex: glyphs carved into temples and books made of bark. Time, to the Maya, was sacred. They believed the universe moved in cycles. Every moment had a meaning. Farther north, the Aztec Empire rose in the Valley of Mexico. Its capital, Tenochtitlan, was built on an island in the middle of a lake. It had canals, bridges, gardens, and stone temples. The Aztec believed in many gods, each connected to nature: the sun, the rain, the corn, the wind. Ceremony was part of everyday life. Music, dance, offerings, even sacrifices were ways to keep the world in balance. The Aztec also had markets, enormous ones, where tens of thousands of people traded goods daily. They used cacao beans as money, and they recorded history with painted codices, books made by hand. To the south, in the high mountains of the Andes, the Inca Empire stretched along the spine of South America. They ruled over 2,500 miles of land, connected by stone roads and rope bridges. They built Machu Picchu, a city in the clouds, and developed systems for farming on mountain terraces. The Inca had no written language. Instead, they used a system of knotted cords called quipu to record numbers and stories. Their capital was Cusco, and from there, they organized food storage, road maintenance, and military defense, all without wheels or money. Everything was managed by shared labor and respect for the emperor, who was considered a descendant of the sun. Before cities had names, before calendars and foreign maps, life in the Americas moved to its own rhythm. It was shaped by seasons, by the sun and moon, by rivers, forests, and mountains. Across these lands, millions of people lived day to day, not as warriors or kings, but as farmers, fishers, weavers, and children. Let's take a quiet look at what life was like. Food was central, of course. In the forests of the north, people hunted deer and elk. On the plains, they followed bison herds. By rivers and lakes, they fished with nets or spears. And in many regions, they farmed. In Mesoamerica, the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, grew together in harmony. Corn stood tall, beans climbed the stalks, squash spread across the ground, keeping weeds away and the soil moist. This method was simple but wise. It fed entire villages. In the Andes, people grew potatoes, over 1,000 varieties. They stored them by freeze-drying in the mountain air, a method still used today. Llamas and alpacas carried goods and gave wool. Guinea pigs were kept for food. Near the sea, salt and dried fish were traded between villages. Food was shared, stored, celebrated. It was part of the cycle of planting, harvesting, and returning to the earth. Homes were different in each region. In the forests of the northeast, people lived in longhouses built from wood and bark. Several families might share one, each with their own fire. On the plains, teepees could be moved quickly, perfect for following the bison herds. In desert regions, homes were carved into cliffs or built from adobe, a mix of mud and straw that stayed cool in the heat. In the Andes, houses were made of stone, carefully placed without mortar, so tight that even today, many of them still stand. Inside these homes, there were no glass windows, just clay pots, woven mats, tools made of bone or stone, and spaces for gathering. At night, firelight flickered, and stories began. Storytelling was the heart of memory. There were no books, no podcasts, but there were voices. Elders told of the stars, of the spirits, of how the world began. They explained why the wind moved, why animals had names, and how people should treat the earth. Stories taught more than history. They taught behavior, kindness, balance. Some stories were about tricksters, clever animals, or people who broke rules and paid the price. Beyond daily routines, beyond farming and building and gathering, the peoples of the Americas carried with them something just as important: knowledge. Carefully passed from generation to generation, often without writing, but never without meaning. Let's explore 3 parts of that knowledge: astronomy, medicine, and trade. All across the Americas, people looked to the sky. The stars were not just distant lights. They were markers of time, messengers of the seasons, and often sacred beings. In the highlands of Mexico, the Maya tracked the movements of planets with great precision. They built observatories, round towers with carefully placed windows, aligned with the rising of Venus or the sun during solstices. They created multiple calendars, including a sacred 260-day cycle and a 365-day solar calendar. These helped guide planting, ceremonies, and leadership decisions. Farther north, many cultures built stone circles, mounds, or wooden posts aligned with solstices and equinoxes. In Chaco Canyon, in present-day New Mexico, the ancestral Puebloans carved a spiral into a cliff. At summer solstice, sunlight passed perfectly through a gap, shining onto the spiral's center. Even without telescopes or charts, these communities understood the patterns of the sky. They watched patiently, and they remembered. Traditional medicine was rooted in close observation of the land, of the body, and of time. Each region had its own plants, its own methods, its own healers. In the Amazon, there are plants with hundreds of uses for cuts, fevers, pain, and even digestion. In the forests of the north, willow bark was chewed for pain relief. It contains salicin, a natural chemical very similar to aspirin. Healers used herbs, smoke, sweat lodges, and massage. But healing was more than just physical. It was spiritual, balanced. It involved the whole person, their mind, body, dreams, and place in the world. Illness was often seen as an imbalance, not an enemy. And the goal of medicine was not just to fight, but to restore. Even though most communities lived far apart, they were never fully isolated. The Americas were connected by vast trade networks, many without written records. Goods and ideas traveled for hundreds, even thousands of miles. Obsidian from central Mexico has been found in the American Southwest. Shells from the Gulf of Mexico reached the Great Lakes. Copper from the north moved south along river systems. The Inca built a system of roads, over 25,000 miles long, called the Capacñan. Messengers, called chasquis, ran between stations, carrying messages on foot. In other regions, trade was done by canoe, or on foot. There were no horses until after European contact, and no wheels in use for transport. Yet these systems worked, not with money, but with exchange. Goods for goods, services for services, always based on need and relationship. And through these trade routes, people also shared stories, songs, dyes, seeds, and dreams. For thousands of years, the peoples of the Americas lived without knowing anyone else was out there. They believed they lived at the center of the world, or at least their world. And in truth, they did. But across the ocean, other people were sailing. Other maps were being drawn. And in the year 1492, ships reached the shores of the Caribbean. It was not a planned meeting. It was not a war at first. It was simply a new arrival. The first contact was small. A few ships, a few sailors. They didn't speak the same language, they didn't share the same gods, but they stood on the same earth. To the people of the Americas, the visitors looked strange. Their skin, their clothes, their animals, horses, pigs, and cattle were unfamiliar. To the Europeans, the land seemed rich and open. They saw gold. They saw opportunity. They saw something new. Neither side understood what would come next. At first, there was trade, gifts, curiosity. But something invisible came with the ships. Disease. Smallpox, measles, and influenza. Illnesses that had spread in Europe for centuries now entered a land where no one had immunity. Entire villages grew sick. Many died within days. Some communities disappeared in a single season without a single battle, without a single word exchanged. Other changes followed. Horses, once unknown in the Americas, spread quickly, especially among the peoples of the Great Plains. They changed hunting, travel, and even warfare. Iron tools and metal weapons were stronger than stone. Wheat, sugar, and new fruits arrived, along with animals like sheep and cows. But much was lost too. Languages faded. Codices were burned. Temples crumbled. The balance that had lasted for generations began to shift. Not all change was immediate, and not all was destruction. Some people found ways to adapt. They learned new skills, blended old traditions with new tools, and kept their communities together. Still, the quiet world that had existed for thousands of years, of pyramids, longhouses, farming terraces, and sacred calendars, began to fade. And yet, it never disappeared. Even today, the descendants of the Maya, the Inca, the Aztec, the Mississippians, and hundreds of other nations still live, speak, remember, and rebuild. Tonight, we've followed a long path. We walked with the first people as they crossed the cold, Bering Land Bridge, watched civilizations rise from the forest and stone, heard the quiet of daily life under sun and stars, and witnessed the moment when two worlds met for the first time. The world before Columbus was not empty. It was not waiting to be discovered. It was already full of languages, beliefs, families, and meaning. The people of the Americas had shaped the land for thousands of years. They knew its seasons, they respected its rhythms, and they lived with it, not above it. Their cities had calendars, their paths followed stars, their hands built without iron but with skill, purpose, and time. Much has changed. Many things have been lost, but not everything. If you walk through the forests of Mexico, you'll still hear the Maya tongue. In the Andes, farmers still plant terraces the way their ancestors did. In North America, elders still tell the old stories by firelight. And all across the continents, people are remembering, preserving, reviving. The past is not gone. So tonight, let us remember the world that came before, not in sorrow, but in quiet respect. Let us honor the long footsteps across the ice, the wisdom of those who planted maize and watched the sky, and the resilience of all who remained when the world changed.
Hello, welcome back. Tonight, we're going to take a journey to a city in the sky, a place where stone meets cloud and memory meets mystery. It's called Machu Picchu, and for centuries it lay hidden in the Andes, almost untouched by time. We'll begin in just a moment, but before we do, write in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It always amazes me how far these stories can travel. And if you enjoy these calm journeys into the past, consider liking this video or subscribing. It means a lot. Now, let's begin tonight's story. The Inca Empire, or Tawantinsuyu, had become the largest empire in the Americas. From highland valleys to dry coastlines, it stretched across more than 3,000 kilometers of land, across what is now Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. At its heart was Pachacuti, the ninth ruler of the Inca. His name means earth shaker. He was a builder, a reformer, and a strategist. He had turned the small Inca kingdom centered in Cusco into a vast empire. After defending his city from invasion, Pachacuti expanded his realm, reorganized its government, and launched a new building campaign that included temples, roads, and royal estates. And among those, he likely ordered something unusual: a royal retreat, high in the mountains, far from the noise of Cusco. That place, we believe, was Machu Picchu. The name means Old Peak in Quechua, the language of the Inca. It was never its original name. We don't know what the Inca called it. But the site they chose was special. It lay between two sharp mountains, Machu Picchu and Huayna Picchu, on a ridge 2,400 meters above sea level, in a zone where highland meets jungle. The location was difficult, but not random. It was protected by steep cliffs, close to important sacred peaks, and perhaps most importantly, aligned with astronomical cycles and sacred geography. This was more than a hideaway, it was a sacred landscape. Construction likely began during Pachacuti's reign and took decades. It was built using mita, a labor system where communities contributed work instead of taxes. These were not enslaved workers. They were part of a national system of contribution, organized with impressive efficiency. Stone blocks, some weighing over 10 tons, were quarried from the nearby mountain itself. There is no evidence the Inca used wheels or iron tools. Instead, they shaped stones using hammer stones and abrasion. Each stone was placed by hand, no mortar, fitted so tightly that even centuries later the joints are nearly impossible to slip a blade between. The city was designed with zones, an urban sector for temples, elite housing and ceremony, an agricultural sector with terraces cut into the mountainside, and a central ceremonial core with plazas and sacred stones. From the beginning, Machu Picchu was more than functional. It was symbolic. Its buildings aligned with solstices, its plazas opened towards sacred mountains or apus, which were believed to be spirits. To live here, or even to visit, was not just a retreat from the empire. It was a return to something older, a place where the earth, sky, and stone met in quiet harmony. Machu Picchu was never a large city. At its height, perhaps 300 to 500 people lived there year-round, maybe more during festivals or royal visits. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in detail. Every inch was planned, every path had purpose. Let's begin with the terraces. Cut into the steep slopes, the terraces held not only soil, but time-tested engineering. Each layer included stone chips, sand, and rich topsoil. This allowed for drainage, prevented erosion, and made farming possible on the mountain face. Crops like maize and potatoes may have been grown here, both staple foods in Inca culture. The drainage system of Machu Picchu is still one of its most impressive features. The builders created over 100 drainage points, hidden under paths and stairs, to move rainwater safely out of the site. Without this, the city might have collapsed under the pressure of landslides and flooding. Then there was the spring. A natural spring above the city was tapped and carefully diverted. From this, the Inca constructed 16 fountains, each carved with channels and basins. These cascaded down through the city, not just for drinking, but likely used in ritual washing or offerings. Water was not merely functional. To the Inca, water was sacred. To guide it so precisely was to honor it. Next, the urban center. Stone stairways connected levels of the city. More than 170 steps in total. The city had no written signs, yet its layout is readable. Public plazas, open terraces, and narrow alleys suggest a deep awareness of how people moved and how space was shared. Houses in the residential area were rectangular with thatched roofs. They had niches in the walls, likely for storage or offerings. There were sleeping platforms, cooking pits, and stone drains. But the finest stones, smooth and perfectly aligned, were saved for sacred buildings. One of the most important was the Temple of the Sun. Its base is curved, rare in Inca design, built with massive stones that follow the natural rock. A small window in the temple aligns with the sun on the winter solstice. On that day, light enters the window and lands directly on a stone altar inside. Another building, called the Temple of the Three Windows, sits beside the main plaza. The three trapezoidal windows face the sacred valley. Some believe they represent the Inca concept of the universe. The heavens, Hanan Pacha. The world of the living, Kai Pacha. The underworld, Uku Pacha. Together, they form a picture of how the Inca viewed life, not as a straight line, but a circle of worlds, all connected. And in the heart of the ceremonial zone lies the Intihuatana stone, a carved pillar on a raised platform. Its name means hitching post of the sun. On equinox days, the sun stands directly above it, casting no shadow. Some scholars believe it was used to track the calendar. Others think it played a role in rituals to tie the sun to the earth, keeping the seasons in balance. The Spanish destroyed many stones like this, but they never found Machu Picchu.
Every wall, every channel, every temple was built with both utility and meaning. Machu Picchu was not just a home for the elite. It was a cosmic map built in stone. And at the center of it all stood the Sapa Inca, the emperor, a figure believed to be descended from the sun. For him, and for those who came with him, this was a place to connect with the sacred, far from the politics of Cusco.
Machu Picchu wasn't just stone and sky, it was alive. People lived here. They farmed, they prayed, they carried water, cooked food, raised children and swept the paths. They were not ordinary villagers, nor were they slaves. They were caretakers, elite attendants, priests, farmers, builders, chosen to serve a royal estate. According to archaeologists, most of the people who lived in Machu Picchu were likely Yanakuna, specialists who served the Inca court. Others may have been Aklas, chosen women, selected for ritual duties, weaving or food preparation. Some may have come from all corners of the empire, as Pachacuti gathered loyal families from every province to serve the state and the sacred. These residents lived in well-constructed homes made of stone, with thatched roofs and compact interiors. Their daily life revolved around caretaking of the temples, the fountains, and the emperor's estate. There were storage rooms, culaquas, for food, textiles, and ceremonial items. There were kitchens with clay ovens and signs of cooking fires. There were gardens and llamas, perhaps raised for both labor and ritual offerings. Machu Picchu was likely never self-sufficient. It depended on supply lines from the sacred valley below. Goods and people traveled up narrow trails on foot. Llamas, the Incas' pack animals, helped carry supplies, but only so much. And that's part of what made Machu Picchu unique. It was remote, but deeply connected. The entire Inca Empire was woven together by a network of roads called the Capacñan, more than 25,000 miles of trails stretching across mountains, deserts, and forests. Messengers called chasquis ran along these roads, relaying messages and goods between regions. Rest stops, tambos, dotted the trails, where travelers could rest and eat. Machu Picchu sat near one such major route, though it remained slightly off the main line, hidden, protected, and sacred. Why build something so elaborate in such a hard-to-reach place? Most historians agree Machu Picchu was a royal estate, a seasonal retreat where Pachacuti and his court could conduct ceremonies, rest, and connect with sacred geography. Think of it like a spiritual lodge, not a capital. But it also had ritual weight. It was likely used during solstices, harvests, and other important moments on the Inca calendar. Priests and nobles may have gathered to offer coca leaves, chicha, a ceremonial maize drink, and songs to the mountain gods, the Apus.
And then it stopped. Sometime in the early 1500s, the site was abandoned, not destroyed, not burned, just left. Why? There are several theories. Some suggest that after Pachacuti died, the estate simply lost its purpose. Other Inca emperors built their own retreats. Another theory points to the arrival of the Spanish, who began their conquest of the empire in 1532. Though there's no record they ever found Machu Picchu, their disruption of the empire through war, disease, and forced labor likely made the upkeep of this remote site impossible. With no ruler, no support, and no empire to serve, the caretakers left. The jungle moved in.
and the city fell into silence.
For nearly 400 years, Machu Picchu remained mostly hidden, not destroyed, not buried, just overgrown. The forest wrapped itself around the stones. Trails faded, the rituals stopped. But the city wasn't truly forgotten. Local Quechua-speaking farmers in the nearby mountains always knew about the ruins. They called the place Machu Picchu, Old Peak, after the mountain beside it. Some even farmed its terraces. But to the outside world, it was unknown. That changed in 1911, when a Yale professor named Hiram Bingham arrived in Peru. He wasn't looking for Machu Picchu. He was searching for the lost city of the Incas, a place called Vilcabamba, where the final Inca rulers resisted the Spanish. Guided by locals and a young boy from a nearby farmhouse, Bingham climbed up the ridge through thick jungle, and there it was. Stone terraces, crumbling temples, walls still standing after centuries. Machu Picchu had revealed itself again, not to an emperor, but to a curious outsider. Bingham returned the following year with a team from Yale and the National Geographic Society. They cleared brush, mapped the site, and excavated thousands of artifacts. Pottery, tools, jewelry, human remains. They shipped many of these items to the United States for study, a move that sparked decades of controversy. Peru later requested their return, arguing that the artifacts belonged to the country, not a university. In 2012, after long negotiations, Yale agreed to return many of the items, a step toward repairing the cultural loss. Still, it was Bingham's discovery that brought Machu Picchu to international attention. National Geographic published a full issue about the site in 1913. Photographs of the terraces, temples, and misty mountains fascinated readers. Tourists began to arrive, and slowly the world came to see Machu Picchu, not as a lost ruin, but as a treasure of human history. But even today, what it was really called, and what exactly it was used for, remains debated. Was it a spiritual center, a royal palace, an astronomical observatory? Probably some of all three. What's certain is this: it was built with care, it was used with purpose, and it was left in peace. And that peace is part of what makes Machu Picchu so special. Unlike many ancient sites, it was never conquered, never repurposed, never looted in war. Today, Machu Picchu is one of the most visited places in South America. More than 1 million people come every year. They hike the Inca Trail. They ride the train from the Sacred Valley. They stand quietly at the Sun Gate at dawn, watching the lights spill over the ruins. But the crowds also bring challenges. Too many footsteps wear down the paths. Humidity and pressure from tourism can weaken the stones. The delicate ecosystem of the cloud forest, with its rare orchids, birds, and mammals, is sensitive to disruption. To protect the site, the Peruvian government has placed limits on how many people can visit each day. Guides are required. Some trails rotate between open and closed to allow rest. There's also a broader conservation effort in place. Machu Picchu lies within a larger national park and UNESCO World Heritage Site, which includes the surrounding mountains, valleys, and wildlife. Technology has helped. Experts use drones, 3D scanners, and satellite data to study the ruins without disturbing them. Archaeologists now know more than ever about the city's layout, construction, and how water flowed through it. And yet, even with all this progress, many questions remain. Who lived in each house?
Why did they place one temple there and not elsewhere? What stories did they tell at night under those same stars? Machu Picchu doesn't give up its secrets easily, but perhaps that's part of its magic. For the people of Peru, especially indigenous Quechua communities, Machu Picchu is not just a tourist site. It is part of their living heritage. It reminds them of who they are, of what their ancestors built, with no iron, no wheels, no writing, only knowledge, stone, and deep respect for the land. Many Quechua people still live in the sacred valley and nearby villages. They grow potatoes and quinoa. They speak the language of the Inca. They weave patterns that carry stories older than books. Their connection to the land and to Machu Picchu is personal.
Machu Picchu stood still for centuries. Long after its builders were gone, long after the empire that shaped it had faded, it stayed. No one rebuilt it. No one turned it into something else. It simply rested on its mountain among clouds and silence. It is rare for a place to remain like that, to be untouched by war, by fire, by time. But Machu Picchu was protected by its isolation. It was too high, too hidden, too sacred. Maybe that's why, when people walk its paths today, they feel something more than curiosity. They feel reverence. You can stand in the main plaza and hear nothing but the wind. You can walk past the Temple of the Sun and notice how the stones still fit together. You can watch the sunrise spill across the terraces and feel as though someone long ago once watched it the same way. Because they did. And now, so do you. It was a place of rest, a place of ritual, a place where stone became spirit. And tonight, it still rests in the arms of the mountains, under the watchful stars, wrapped in mist and memory. Let it remind us that even in silence, meaning can remain. Even in ruins, beauty survives. And even in mystery, there is peace. And that, dear listener, is where our story rests tonight. Thank you for watching my video. See you in the next one. Machu Picchu stood still for centuries. Long after its builders were gone, long after the empire that shaped it had faded, it stayed. No one rebuilt it. No one turned it into something else. It simply rested on its mountain among clouds and silence. It is rare for a place to remain like that, to be untouched by war, by fire, by time. But Machu Picchu was protected by its isolation. It was too high, too hidden, too sacred. Maybe that's why, when people walk its paths today, they feel something more than curiosity. They feel reverence. You can stand in the main plaza and hear nothing but the wind. You can walk past the Temple of the Sun and notice how the stones still fit together. You can watch the sunrise spill across the terraces and feel as though someone long ago once watched it the same way. Because they did. And now, so do you. It was a place of rest, a place of ritual, a place where stone became spirit. And tonight, it still rests in the arms of the mountains, under the watchful stars, wrapped in mist and memory. Let it remind us that even in silence, meaning can remain. Even in ruins, beauty survives. And even in mystery, there is peace. Tonight, we have a quiet story about the Great Pyramid of Giza. We'll begin in just a moment. But before we do, write in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I always love seeing how far our little storytelling circle reaches. And if you enjoy these bedtime stories, consider liking this video or subscribing. It really helps, and it means a lot to me. Thank you. Now, let's begin tonight's story. Long before there were cities made of glass or machines made of steel, there was a river, the Nile, flowing slowly through the dry land of Egypt, gave life to one of the world's earliest civilizations. Each year, the river rose and flooded the land. When it went back down, it left behind the rich, dark soil. That soil fed wheat and barley. It helped people grow food, raise animals, and build small villages. And from these quiet villages came something much greater, a united kingdom. By around 2600 BCE, Egypt had become strong and wealthy. It was ruled by a powerful king called a pharaoh. To his people, the pharaoh was more than just a ruler. He was a god on earth. He brought order to the world. He kept the river flowing and the seasons turning. And when he died, they believed his soul would rise to the stars. This belief in the afterlife, in a life after death, shaped almost everything in ancient Egypt. It shaped their prayers, their buildings, their art, and most of all, their tombs. For the Egyptians, death was not the end. It was a journey, and the soul needed help on that journey. Food, tools, a body to return to, and a safe resting place. That is why they built tombs. And for the pharaohs, these tombs were unlike anything the world had ever seen. One of those kings was named Khufu. He ruled during the 4th dynasty of Egypt's Old Kingdom, more than 4,500 years ago. Not much is known about his personality. He left behind few records, but he left behind something much bigger. A pyramid, the greatest pyramid ever built. It was not Egypt's first pyramid. That title goes to a king named Djoser, whose tomb was shaped like stacked steps. But Khufu's pyramid was different. It would be smooth on the outside, large enough to hold his soul forever, and made to last for thousands of years. He chose a spot on the Giza Plateau, a rocky hill west of the Nile, near the capital city of Memphis. From there, he could see the river and the sunset. And from anywhere nearby, people could see the pyramid rise. Construction likely began in the early years of his reign. It would take decades to complete. But Khufu had a plan, and he had the power to make it happen. To do this, he gathered architects, planners, skilled workers, and thousands of laborers from across Egypt. They were not slaves, as once believed. They were paid workers, well-fed and housed in nearby camps. Their job was hard, but it was important, not just for the king, but for Egypt itself. Building the pyramid was a national project, a symbol of strength, a symbol of faith, and a way to show the world what Egypt could do. The first step was preparing the ground. The builders cleared the site and leveled the bedrock with simple tools.
Copper chisels, stone hammers, and hard work. They marked the corners using ropes, plumb lines, and wooden sighting tools. Somehow, without GPS, without lasers, they laid out a nearly perfect square. Each side was about 230 meters long. Each corner pointed almost exactly to the four directions: north, south, east, and west. Even today, engineers are amazed at how precise it is. Not perfect, but close. So close that modern surveys often come within centimeters of the original design. And with that, the pyramid could begin.
Once the ground had been leveled and measured, the workers began the slow, steady process of construction. They did not rush. The pyramid was not something to be built in a few seasons. It would take years, perhaps 2 decades, and every part of it had to be precise. The core of the pyramid was made from limestone blocks. This limestone came from a quarry just next to the Giza plateau. It was easy to cut, but strong once in place. Each block was shaped using copper tools and stone hammers. Some blocks weighed more than 2 tons, and tens of thousands of them were needed. To move these heavy blocks, the builders used simple methods, but on a large scale. They placed the stones on wooden sleds and dragged them across the ground. To help the sleds move more smoothly, workers may have poured water onto the sand in front of them. This reduced friction and helped keep the sand from bunching up. We still don't know exactly how they lifted the blocks higher as the pyramid grew taller. Some believe they built long ramps of mud brick and rubble, sloping around the pyramid in a spiral or zigzag pattern. Others think they used straight ramps that extended far from the base. No ramp has survived, but the worn edges of the plateau offer clues. And the effort needed is not hard to imagine. Thousands of people, pulling in rhythm, guided by team leaders, step by step. The outer layer of the pyramid was made of a finer, white limestone, brought from across the Nile. This limestone was harder and brighter. When polished, it reflected the sun so well that the pyramid would have shone in daylight, like a white jewel on the desert edge. Higher inside the pyramid, in the chambers and passageways, a different kind of stone was used. Red granite, heavier and harder than limestone, was brought from Aswan, nearly 900 kilometers to the south. These blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons, were floated down the Nile on large wooden boats. Once they arrived, workers had to haul them uphill to the pyramid's heart. This required skill, planning, and strength. But somehow, they did it. Block after block, day after day.
Most of the people who worked on the pyramid were not permanent slaves. Modern archaeology has shown that they were skilled laborers, organized into crews. They worked in shifts, likely during the months when the Nile flooded and farms were underwater. That way, farmers could take part in national projects without losing their crops. Nearby, at the base of the plateau, the remains of large worker villages have been found. These villages included dormitories, bakeries, breweries, and even clinics. Animal bones and charred grains show they were well fed, with bread, beer, and meat. They were likely cared for if injured. And some were buried near the pyramid site, a sign of honor, not slavery. Graffiti left inside the pyramid chambers, likely hidden when construction finished, shows team names like the Drunkards of Menkora or the Friends of Khufu. This suggests a sense of pride and camaraderie among the workers. They weren't just laborers, they were part of something much greater. As the pyramid rose, so did the complexity. Passageways had to be cut with precision. Air shafts were carved out to connect the burial chamber to the sky. The granite ceiling of the king's chamber was designed with extra layers above it, 5 small chambers stacked on top to distribute the weight. This design prevented collapse, even with thousands of tons of stone pressing down. It shows that the builders understood how to manage forces and balance structure, even without advanced math or modern tools. When the final layer was placed, the pyramid stood nearly 147 meters tall. Its sides were smooth and angled at about 51 degrees. At the top may have stood a pyramidion, a capstone, possibly covered in gold or electrum, to catch the first and last light of the sun each day. The pyramid's outer surface shone bright in the morning and glowed soft at dusk. It was more than a tomb. It was a message, a sign of order, of eternity, and of the pharaoh's journey into the afterlife.
From the outside, the Great Pyramid of Giza looks like a single solid mass, a mountain of limestone rising from the sand. But inside, it holds narrow corridors, mysterious shafts, and a handful of carefully built chambers. Most pyramids in Egypt were built with one burial chamber near the bottom, but Khufu's pyramid is different. It contains 3 main interior spaces, stacked vertically within the structure, a design found in no other pyramid of its time. The lowest of these chambers lies beneath the base, carved directly into the bedrock. We call it the subterranean chamber. It's rough and unfinished, and we still don't know exactly why it was abandoned. It may have been an early idea for the pharaoh's resting place, later changed, or it could have been symbolic, a representation of the underworld. Above that lies the Queen's Chamber, though this name is misleading. There is no evidence that any queen was ever buried there. Its true function is uncertain. Some believe it was part of a spiritual ritual or a symbolic chamber related to Khufu's soul. Others think it may have held sacred statues or objects used in royal ceremonies. The most important space lies even higher up, the King's Chamber. This is where Khufu's sarcophagus still rests today. It is a rectangular granite box, perfectly fitted into the room and likely placed during construction. This chamber is one of the most impressive parts of the pyramid, not only because of the size of the blocks used, some over 50 tons, but because of how it was built to last. Above the King's Chamber are 5 small spaces known as relieving chambers. Each one is separated by thick granite slabs. Their purpose is to absorb and spread the massive weight of stone above, protecting the chamber from collapse. It's a simple idea, but incredibly effective. Without them, the roof would likely have cracked long ago. Inside the pyramid, 2 narrow shafts rise from the King's Chamber. They are not large enough for a person to pass through, but they are carefully aimed toward the stars. One shaft aligns with the Orion constellation, associated in ancient Egypt with Osiris, god of the afterlife. The other points toward the North Star, perhaps symbolizing the eternal direction of the heavens. This shows that the pyramid was more than a tomb. It was a spiritual gateway, a path for the pharaoh's soul to rise and live forever among the gods. Similar shafts connect the Queen's Chamber to the outside, though their purpose is still debated. Were they for ventilation, symbolic passageways, astronomical guides? We still don't know. The exact moment of Khufu's burial is lost to time. No surviving record tells us what rituals were performed or who was present. But based on what we know from other royal burials, we can imagine a quiet procession, a sacred ritual, and priests performing chants and offerings. Yet, like nearly all ancient tombs in Egypt, it was robbed. When later explorers entered the pyramid thousands of years later, they found the King's Chamber empty. Some believe the tomb was robbed just a few hundred years after it was sealed. Others think it happened much later. We may never know what was once inside. In modern times, scans of the pyramid have revealed even more mysteries. In 2017, scientists discovered a large empty space above the Grand Gallery, a steep passageway leading to the King's Chamber. This void, as it's called, is still not explored.
While the pyramid slowly rose on the Giza plateau, life moved steadily all around it. Not just royal planners and priests, but thousands of workers, cooks, stonemasons, rope makers, and water carriers filled the landscape with quiet activity. It wasn't just a construction site, it was a living, breathing community. Archaeologists have uncovered the remains of a large workers' village near the pyramid. The site includes rows of modest buildings, sleeping quarters, open courtyards, and large baking and brewing facilities. Bones from cattle and fish suggest the workers ate well, not luxury food, but good food, enough to keep them strong. The presence of copper tool fragments, ceramic jars, and workspaces shows that this was a well-managed place. This wasn't a camp of slaves. It was a structured labor force, likely organized into teams or rotating crews. Each team had a name, often playful or symbolic. Some left graffiti deep inside the pyramid with names like the Vigorous Gang or the Drunkards of Menkaure. These weren't scribbles of protest, they were marks of pride. Many of the laborers were likely farmers during most of the year, but during the inundation season, when the Nile flooded and fields were underwater, they came to Giza to work. This allowed the state to redirect human effort during a time when farming paused. In return, the workers received food, shelter, and medical care. Yes, medical care. Evidence of healed bones, splints, and even surgeries has been found at worker burial sites. If someone broke a leg, they were cared for and returned to work when they healed. This was not a workforce that was thrown away. It was supported. Some workers were buried in small tombs near the pyramid itself. These tombs were simple but respectful. They included offerings like bread or pottery. That suggests their role in pyramid building was honored, not forgotten.
It wasn't only men who supported the work. Though women likely did not build stones, they worked in food preparation, textile making, and domestic support. Children may have helped carry water or watched after younger siblings in the camps. And while work was hard, the workers lived in a world of meaning. They believed they were part of something sacred. To help build the pharaoh's tomb was not just labor, it was service to the gods, a task that helped the king reach the afterlife, and, in doing so, kept the world in balance. The pyramid stood in the desert, but it was never isolated. Next to it, Khufu's builders placed smaller pyramids for queens and royal women. A long causeway, a raised road lined with stone, connected the pyramid to a valley temple near the river. There, rituals could be performed, offerings could be made. Later pharaohs followed this model. Khufu's son, Khafre, built his own pyramid just beside his father's. His pyramid is slightly shorter, but appears taller due to the higher ground it sits on. Next to it stands the Great Sphinx, a massive statue with the body of a lion and the face of a king. It gazes east, toward the rising sun. Then came Menkaure, Khufu's grandson, who built the smallest of the three pyramids. All three pyramids, with their smaller companions, stand in a line on the Giza plateau, a monument to a dynasty, to a time of vision and order. Though we now see the pyramids as symbols of the past, they were once part of an active and sacred world. Priests tended to the mortuary temples. Rituals were held in the name of the king's soul. Offerings were made regularly of bread, beer, incense, and meat. These rituals didn't stop when the king died. They continued for generations. To the ancient Egyptians, the king still ruled, not on earth, but from the stars. Over time, the world changed. Dynasties ended, temples fell, and knowledge faded. By the time of ancient Greece, around 2,000 years after Khufu, few Egyptians remembered exactly how the Great Pyramid had been built. The old records were gone, and so myths began to grow. One of the earliest foreign visitors to write about the pyramid was Herodotus, a Greek historian who came to Egypt around 450 BCE. He wrote that it took 100,000 men and 20 years to build the pyramid. He also claimed the workers used machines made of short wooden beams to lift the stones step by step.
Modern scholars now believe many of Herodotus's numbers were exaggerated. Still, his stories were passed down for centuries, and with time, more myths began to form. Some said the pyramid was a granary built by the biblical Joseph. Others believed it was built by giants or lost civilizations. In the Middle Ages, travelers told tales of secret treasures, hidden scrolls, or ancient prophecies sealed inside. Many of these stories were written by people who had never been to Egypt. They were based on imagination more than evidence. But the mystery of the pyramid made it easy to believe almost anything. Even today, new theories are shared online or in books, some reasonable, others less so. Some suggest the pyramid was an ancient power plant. Others say it was a landing site for alien visitors. These ideas make for interesting reading, but they're not supported by archaeology or history. The truth is more powerful. The Great Pyramid was made by people, with simple tools, with careful planning, and with generations of experience in stone building, astronomy, and design. Still, there are real mysteries that remain. We don't know exactly how the workers managed to raise the heavy granite blocks for the king's chamber. We haven't found all the records about the construction process, and we don't know for certain what may lie behind sealed stones deep within the structure. In 2017, a team of scientists using particle physics discovered a large hidden space above the Grand Gallery. It has not been opened, and its purpose is still unknown. Is it a chamber, a structural gap, something else? We also continue to study the pyramid's alignment. Its sides are almost perfectly aligned to the cardinal directions. How did the builders achieve this without compasses or satellites? Some researchers believe they used the stars. Others suggest they used the shadow of the sun at different times of day. What's clear is that they observed the sky carefully. They planned not just with the ground in mind, but with the heavens too. Another ongoing question is how the builders organized such a massive workforce. There are no surviving lists, no pay records, no project logs. But from the size of the workers' village and the complexity of the pyramid, we can guess that the system was highly structured. Teams worked under supervisors. Materials arrived on a schedule. Tools were sharpened and distributed. Food and water were delivered daily. In a world without engines or electricity, all of this had to be done by hand, but it was done. In some ways, the mystery of the pyramid is part of its magic. Even with modern technology, we are still learning. And perhaps that's the best reminder of all, that history is not just a set of facts. It's a living story we continue to uncover. More than 4,500 years have passed since the Great Pyramid was finished. In that time, empires have risen and fallen. Languages have changed. Religions, borders, and ideas have come and gone. And still, the pyramid stands. The polished outer casing was removed long ago, used to build mosques and homes in nearby Cairo. Its peak has been worn down by time, but its core remains, weathered but strong. Today, the Giza plateau is surrounded by modern life. Cars pass nearby, apartments stretch into the distance. Cafes and souvenir shops sit just beyond the ancient stones. And yet, as you walk closer to the pyramid, the noise fades. Time slows, and suddenly you are face to face with something built before the world as we know it even began. Tourists come from all over the globe to see it. They climb the short path to the modern entrance. They walk through the long, narrow corridor into the heart of the stone mountain. The Egyptian government works to protect the pyramid and the surrounding monuments. Conservation teams monitor cracks in the stone. Restoration efforts ensure the structure remains safe for future generations. Scholars continue to study every detail, from the alignment of the blocks to the history of the workers who built them. Engineers use drones and 3D scanning to create digital models. Scientists explore with tiny robots and cosmic rays, searching for hidden spaces. And though we know more now than ever before, new questions still emerge. What was once buried is slowly being uncovered, but much remains locked in silence, as if the pyramid is not ready to give up all of its secrets just yet. To the people of Egypt, the pyramid is a source of pride, a symbol of their ancient past and lasting legacy. It appears on money, stamps, and art. It draws the world's attention, not only as a tourist site, but as a reminder of what human hands can build when they are guided by vision, patience, and belief. One day, far in the future, the world may look very different. Skyscrapers may crumble, digital memories may fade. But it's likely the Great Pyramid will still be there, a quiet guardian on the edge of the desert, watching the stars, enduring the wind.
Tonight, we'll take a journey through one of the oldest and most powerful stories ever told, the tale of the Trojan War. This story has been passed down for thousands of years. It is a story of pride, love, fate, and the fall of a mighty city. We'll begin in just a moment, but before we do, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy these retellings, feel free to like or subscribe. It truly helps. Thank you. Now, let's begin tonight's story. The story of the Trojan War begins long before the battles. It begins with a wedding. Far from the fields of Troy on Mount Olympus, the gods had gathered. It was the wedding of Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis, a sea goddess. Everyone was invited, all the gods, all the divine guests, except for one. Eris, the goddess of discord, was left out. She was known for causing trouble. So, angry at the slight, she arrived anyway. She didn't bring music or blessings. She brought a single golden apple. And on that apple she wrote 3 words: to the fairest. 3 powerful goddesses claimed it: Hera, queen of the gods; Athena, goddess of wisdom and war; Aphrodite, goddess of love. They argued. Each believed the apple was meant for her. So they turned to Zeus, king of the gods, and asked him to choose. But Zeus refused. Instead, he sent them to a young shepherd, a prince in hiding living on the slopes of Mount Ida near the city of Troy. His name was Paris. Paris was no ordinary shepherd. He was the son of King Priam and Queen Hecuba of Troy. But before he was born, his mother dreamed of giving birth to a flaming torch, a sign, the prophet said, that her child would bring ruin to Troy. So when Paris was born, his parents left him in the wilderness, hoping nature would take him. But Paris did not die. He was raised by shepherds, far from the palace, never knowing he was royal. Now, years later, the goddesses came to him, each offering a gift in exchange for the apple. Hera promised him great power to rule all of Asia. Athena promised wisdom and success in battle. Aphrodite promised him love, the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite. He gave her the apple, and in doing so, he set the world on a path to war. That most beautiful woman in the world, her name was Helen. She was already married to Menelaus, king of Sparta. But soon, Paris would visit her palace, and soon after, she would sail away with him to Troy. Whether she was stolen or she left by choice, no one can say for sure.
but the Greeks believed she must be taken back. And so the kings of Greece prepared for war. Before Helen married Menelaus, she had many suitors. She was so admired that her stepfather, Tyndareus, worried that choosing one man would lead to conflict. So, a clever idea was proposed by Odysseus, king of Ithaca. Each suitor would swear an oath to protect Helen's marriage and to defend her husband if she were ever taken. Now that Helen was gone, that oath was called upon, and all across Greece, kings and warriors prepared their ships. Menelaus turned to his older brother, Agamemnon, the king of powerful Mycenae. Agamemnon agreed to lead the Greek forces. Messengers were sent far and wide. The greatest warriors of the age were summoned. From Ithaca came Odysseus, clever and cautious. He had just become a father and did not wish to leave his home. He even pretended to be mad, sowing salt into his fields, but the trick was uncovered. He kissed his newborn son goodbye and sailed away. From Phthia, in the north, came a young warrior named Achilles. He was strong, fast, and said to be nearly invincible. When Achilles was born, his mother, Thetis, had dipped him in the river Styx. The waters made his body hard as bronze, but where she held him by the heel, that spot remained vulnerable. Thetis knew he was destined to die young, so she hid him on a distant island, dressed as a girl, but he was found. And when told of his fate, that he could live a long, quiet life or die young and famous, Achilles chose glory. With Achilles came his close companion, Patroclus. Together, they joined the growing army. From Salamis came Ajax the Greater, tall and powerful. From Pylos came Nestor, old and wise. From Crete came Idomeneus, and from many other cities came warriors and ships. In total, the Greek army gathered more than 1,000 ships, but the fleet could not sail. The wind would not rise. The seer Calchas said that the goddess Artemis had been offended, and that Agamemnon must offer a great sacrifice to please her. It was a cruel demand. He had to give up his daughter, Iphigenia. The stories differ here. Some say she was tricked, thinking she was going to be married. Others say she went willingly, proud to help her people. In the end, Iphigenia was gone, and the wind returned. The sails were raised, the ships pushed off from shore. The army crossed the sea, heading east toward the city of Troy. The Greek fleet reached the shores near Troy. The warriors stepped off their ships one after another onto the sandy beach. They built their camp near the sea, surrounded by walls and watchtowers. It would become their home for the next 10 years. But at first, they believed the war would be quick. The Greeks sent Odysseus and Menelaus to Troy with an offer: return Helen, avoid war. But King Priam, ruler of Troy, refused. He was torn. He did not start the trouble, but Paris was his son, and Helen was now under his roof. Honor held him back, and so the war began. In the early battles, both sides tested one another. Paris, whose actions had started it all, offered to face Menelaus in single combat. If Paris won, Helen would stay. If Menelaus won, she would return to Greece. The armies paused, watching closely. Paris stepped forward, elegant but unsure. Menelaus, stronger and more seasoned, struck hard. Paris faltered, nearly killed, but was suddenly swept away by the goddess Aphrodite. She returned him to Helen's chambers inside the city. The duel had ended, but not the war. As the fighting grew, so did the legends. The Greeks could not breach the walls of Troy, so they raided the surrounding lands instead, burning villages, cutting supplies. The Trojans, led by noble Hector, held the city. He was a prince, a brother to Paris, and the pride of Troy. Hector was brave, wise, and loved by his people. He fought to protect, not to conquer. Meanwhile, Achilles, the Greeks' greatest warrior, became angry. Agamemnon had claimed a captured woman, Briseis, who had been given to Achilles. Achilles felt insulted, dishonored. In rage, he withdrew from battle. He sat in his tent and refused to fight. Without him, the Greeks began to lose ground. The Trojans pushed forward. One night, Hector returned from battle to his wife, Andromache, and their infant son. She begged him not to return to the field. She had already lost so much. But Hector gently explained his duty was to fight. He knew the risks, but he could not stay behind. He held his son one last time. Then he placed his helmet on his head and stepped out into the sunlight. Without Achilles, the Greeks began to fall back. The Trojans, led by Hector, pressed harder. They reached the Greek ships. Fires were lit. Victory seemed close. The Greek warriors begged Achilles to return, but he refused. His pride still burned. Watching from the shadows was Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion. He saw the Greeks suffer. He saw the ships burn. And he asked Achilles for a favor. "Let me wear your armor," Patroclus said. "They will think I am you. The Trojans will fall back, and I will protect our people." Achilles agreed, but warned him, "Push them back from the ships, but go no farther. Do not chase them to the gates." Patroclus nodded. He put on Achilles' shining armor. He led the Myrmidons, Achilles' men, into battle. The Trojans saw the figure in gold and fled in fear. The tide turned. But Patroclus forgot the warning. He was brave, but not invincible. He chased the Trojans to the walls of Troy. There, he met Hector. They fought, and Hector struck him down. Patroclus fell, whispering with his last breath, "You will not live long. Achilles will come for you." When word reached Achilles, his heart broke. He cried out in grief. He covered himself in ash. He held Patroclus' body and wept. His anger turned to fury. He would return to battle. But first, he needed armor. His mother Thetis went to the god Hephaestus, who forged new armor for him. A shield shining with the world itself carved into its metal. Achilles put it on, and with the rising sun he marched into battle. The Greeks saw him and found hope. The Trojans saw him and felt fear. Achilles cut through the field like a storm. He found Hector outside the gates. The two faced each other. No one interfered. They circled 3 times. Then Hector stood his ground. They fought, and Achilles, in his rage, struck Hector down. But his grief had made him cruel. He tied Hector's body to his chariot. He dragged it around the city walls. A painful sight for all inside, especially for King Priam and Queen Hecuba. But the gods were watching. They whispered to Achilles. They sent dreams to the old king. One night, King Priam came in secret to the Greek camp. He entered Achilles' tent, knelt before him, and begged, "Give me back my son." Achilles looked at the old man, and something in his heart softened. He remembered his own father. He remembered his pain. He gently returned Hector's body, and for a while, there was peace. Achilles had returned to the war, and his presence shifted everything. The Greeks fought harder. The Trojans grew cautious. But the gods still moved behind the scenes. Some favored Troy, others favored the Greeks, and their quarrels shaped the fate of mortals. After Hector's funeral, the fighting resumed. Achilles burned with grief, but also pride. He continued to strike down Trojan warriors. He seemed unstoppable. But no one, not even Achilles, is beyond fate. In Troy, there lived a prince named Paris, the same man who had once judged the goddesses and taken Helen. He was not known for bravery in battle, but now he had a chance. With help from the god Apollo, Paris aimed his bow. He fired a single arrow. It struck Achilles in the heel, the one place he was vulnerable. Achilles fell. The greatest warrior of the Greeks was gone.
His body was carried back to camp. The Greeks mourned him. Even his enemies felt the weight of his loss. His armor, once made by the gods, was now passed on. 2 warriors wanted it. Ajax, strong and loyal, and Odysseus, clever and quick. A contest was held. Odysseus was chosen. Ajax, feeling humiliated, fell into despair. And soon, he too was gone. The war dragged on. Without Achilles, without Hector, the field felt empty. But the Greeks remembered a prophecy. Troy could not fall unless the bow of Heracles was used. So they sought out Philoctetes, an archer who had once been abandoned on an island. He still carried that bow. Odysseus convinced him to return. With that weapon, they killed Paris. Inside Troy, King Priam and Queen Hecuba mourned another son. Their city still stood, but only just. The Greeks needed a final plan. Something bold, something clever. It was Odysseus' idea. He proposed building a giant wooden horse, tall, hollow, and wheeled. Inside, he and a group of Greek warriors would hide. The rest of the Greek army, he said, would burn their tents and sail away, making it look like they had given up. The horse would be left behind as a gift, a tribute to the gods. And so it was built. Huge, beautiful, suspicious. The Greeks set it at the gates of Troy and left, or so it seemed. The Trojans came out of the city, amazed. Some were excited, some were cautious. One priest, Laocoon, warned them, "Beware of Greeks, even bearing gifts," he said. To prove his point, he threw a spear into the horse's side. It echoed strangely hollow. But just then, a strange thing happened. From the sea, 2 great serpents rose. They attacked Laocoon and his sons. The Trojans watched in horror as they were pulled under. They took it as a sign from the gods. Meanwhile, a Greek named Sinon had stayed behind, pretending to be a deserter. He told the Trojans the horse was sacred, an offering to Athena, and if they brought it into the city, it would bring them favor. The Trojans believed him. They opened the gates. They pulled the horse inside. That night, they celebrated. They sang. They drank. They felt safe. And while the city slept, a small trapdoor opened from the belly of the horse. Odysseus and his men climbed out. They slipped down ropes and ran to the gates. They signaled the waiting ships, which had only hidden behind a nearby island. The Greek army returned, silently, swiftly. They entered the gates. They lit fires. They opened the doors to the rest of the army. And Troy burned. The city was taken in the night. Fires climbed into the sky. Palaces crumbled. Temples fell. King Priam was killed in his own home. Queen Hecuba was taken away in chains. The princes were gone. And the people of Troy
proud and brave, were scattered. Only a few would escape. One of them was Aeneas, who carried his father on his back and held his young son's hand. He would become the subject of another long story, the tale of the founding of Rome. But for Troy, this was the end. For many of the Greek warriors, the journey home would become its own trial. Agamemnon, the commander of the Greek forces, returned to Mycenae in glory. But at home, betrayal waited. His wife, Clytemnestra, had not forgiven him for the sacrifice of their daughter, and Agamemnon never ruled again. Menelaus, husband of Helen, did bring her home. Their return was long and stormy, filled with whispers and doubt. But they lived out their years in quiet Sparta, watched by the gods and remembered by the poets. Odysseus, the clever one, faced the longest journey. It would take him 10 more years to return to Ithaca. He would face Cyclops, witches, and tempests. But that is a tale for another night. Among the Trojans, one man escaped. Aeneas, carrying his father on his back and holding his son's hand, fled the burning city. Guided by dreams and fate, he sailed west. The Romans would later tell his story and say that from his bloodline, their empire began. The women of Troy, taken as captives, whispered prayers to their lost gods. Hecuba, once queen, became a shadow. Cassandra, cursed to speak truths no one believed, was dragged away in silence. Their sorrow echoed down the centuries. And the city itself? Troy became dust, buried under sand, under time, but never forgotten. For as long as people have told stories, they have returned to that place, to the walls, the war, the love, and the fall.
Hey there, welcome back. Tonight, we have a calm and beautiful story, the journey of Odysseus. We'll begin in just a moment, but before we do, write in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I always love seeing how far our little storytelling circle reaches. And if you enjoy what I do here, consider liking this video or even subscribing. It truly means a lot to me. Thank you. Now, let's begin tonight's story. In the distant past, when the world was young and the gods still wandered among mortals, there was a small, peaceful island in the Ionian Sea. It was called Ithaca, a land of soft hills, olive groves, and blue waters that sparkled in the sunlight. On this island lived a wise and clever man named Odysseus. Odysseus was not just a king, but a man loved by his people. He ruled not with harsh commands, but with reason and care. The people of Ithaca worked their fields, fished their waters, and raised their children in peace. Odysseus himself found great joy in quiet moments, walking among the olive trees, listening to the breeze, or watching his wife, Penelope, weave at her loom. Penelope was known across the isles for her beauty, grace, and calm spirit. She and Odysseus were deeply in love, bound not just by affection, but by shared wisdom and trust. They had a son, Telemachus, a baby with wide eyes who would someday grow to be a brave young man. Odysseus often carried the child in his arms, pointing to the sea and telling him of the stars, the winds, and the faraway places beyond the horizon. At night, the family sat together in the flickering firelight, and Odysseus would speak of the old tales, of gods, monsters, and heroes long gone. Ithaca was not rich in gold, but in these moments, it was richer than any kingdom. Far across the sea, a great conflict began to rise, a war born from pride, promises, and stolen love. The city of Troy had taken Helen, queen of Sparta, and the kings of Greece, once bound by oaths of brotherhood, were summoned to bring her home. Among those called was Odysseus. He did not wish to leave. His heart was tied to Ithaca, to Penelope, and to the little boy who now walked beside him, holding his hand. Odysseus even tried to stay behind, feigning madness. But in time, he was recognized for who he was, a man of reason, not madness. Bound by honor, he could not refuse the call. The day of departure came. The sun hung low over the sea, casting golden light on the quiet harbor. Penelope stood still, her face calm but her hands trembling. Telemachus, still too young to understand, clutched at his father's robes. Odysseus knelt, holding the child close. He whispered promises that he would return, that he would not forget. Then he stood, turned, and boarded his ship. The sails were raised, and the wind caught them gently. Ithaca began to shrink behind him, its hills softening in the distance. And so began the first step of a journey that would last not months or years, but decades. The war against Troy raged for 10 long years. Odysseus fought bravely, though he was known more for his wit than his sword. He counseled kings, avoided needless battles, and led with cleverness. But the walls of Troy stood tall, and many Greek warriors began to despair. It was Odysseus who devised the final plan, a great wooden horse, hollow on the inside, left as a gift to the Trojans. The Greeks pretended to sail away, leaving the horse behind. The Trojans, believing the war was over, pulled the horse into their city. That night, beneath the silent moon, Greek soldiers emerged from the horse's belly and opened the gates. Troy burned. The war was ended, but not without cost. Thousands had died. Cities had fallen. Hearts had been broken. Odysseus, weary from battle, gathered his men. He longed for Ithaca, for Penelope, for Telemachus, for the sound of home. With 12 ships under his command, he set sail into the open sea, dreaming of the green hills and calm shores he had not seen in a decade. But the sea does not always welcome dreamers. After leaving Troy, Odysseus and his men came to the land of the Cicones, allies of the Trojans. At first, they raided and celebrated, taking food and wine. But the Cicones returned with more warriors, fierce and prepared. A battle broke out on the shore. Odysseus called for retreat, but his men, filled with pride and drink, delayed too long. Many were lost before the ships pushed off again, oars cutting through red-stained water. Silence fell over the fleet, a silence that clung like morning fog. It was a bitter lesson, one that would echo again and again. The sea rewards humility, not arrogance. Days later, they reached a strange, dreamy island where the air was thick with perfume and the sun never seemed to set. This was the land of the lotus eaters, where people lived in endless peace, sustained by the sweet flowers of the lotus plant. Those who ate the lotus forgot their homes, their names, even the reason they sailed. They smiled softly, laid down in the warm grass, and wished only to sleep. Some of Odysseus's men ate the flower. They laughed, empty of memory. But Odysseus, wise and firm, carried them back to the ships by hand. He tied them to the benches, not out of cruelty, but mercy. And they sailed on, hearts heavier than before. They next arrived at a green island with tall cliffs and bleating goats. Beyond it lay a darker, wilder place, home to the Cyclopes, giant shepherds with one eye each who lived alone and knew nothing of kindness. Odysseus, curious, led a group to explore. They found a cave, vast and echoing, where cheeses and lambs were stored, but its master, Polyphemus, soon returned. He blocked the entrance with a massive stone and began to eat the men one by one. Odysseus waited. He offered wine, strong and sweet. The Cyclops drank and slept. Then, with a sharpened log, they struck, blinding the monster. In the dark, they escaped by clinging to the undersides of his sheep. But as they fled, Odysseus shouted his name, an act of pride. And the Cyclops called to his father, Poseidon, god of the sea. From that moment on, Poseidon's wrath would follow them like a shadow. After days of rough sailing, they reached the floating island of Aeolus, keeper of the winds. Aeolus welcomed Odysseus with feasts and stories, and gifted him a bag of wind, every storm sealed inside to help him reach home. For 9 days, they sailed smoothly. Ithaca was in sight. But as Odysseus slept, his crew grew greedy. They thought the bag held gold. They opened it and unleashed the storms. The winds howled. The ships were thrown backward across the sea. When they returned to Aeolus, he turned them away. "The gods are against you," he said, and shut his gates. The sea took them next to a harbor surrounded by tall cliffs. It seemed calm, but it was not. This was the land of the Lestrygonians, giants who hurled boulders like stones. They destroyed the ships, crushing them with monstrous hands. Screams echoed. Men vanished beneath waves. Only one ship survived, Odysseus's own. The rest were lost forever. Odysseus did not speak. He simply sailed onward, his crew smaller, the sea wider. Their next stop was the island of Aea, where lived the sorceress Circe. Her home was hidden among trees, and wolves and lions lounged around her door, not fierce, but calm, enchanted. She welcomed Odysseus's men and turned them into pigs with a flick of her wand. Odysseus, guided by Hermes, resisted her magic. He demanded his men be restored. Circe, moved by his courage, agreed. She became a friend, a host, and for a full year they stayed, eating, resting, healing. But the sea called again, and Circe gave one final instruction. Before he could reach Ithaca, Odysseus must journey to the land of the dead. Odysseus sailed to the edge of the world, where the sun no longer shone and the sea turned to black glass. There, he dug a trench and poured offerings of honey, milk, and blood to summon the dead. The spirits rose like mist. Among them came Tiresias, the blind prophet, who warned of the trials ahead. "Do not harm the cattle of the sun," he said. "Resist temptation, endure." Odysseus saw his mother, who had died of grief, and she spoke gently of Ithaca and Penelope's sorrow. He saw old comrades from Troy, Achilles, still noble, and Agamemnon, still bitter. Their voices lingered like wind through reeds. When the last spirit faded, Odysseus covered the trench and returned to his ship. The world of the living felt strange, as though time itself had paused and resumed only as they raised sail once more. Next, they neared the island of the Sirens. These creatures did not attack with claws or teeth. They sang, and their song was beautiful beyond description. It promised knowledge, peace, love, and forgotten truths. Circe had warned Odysseus. He plugged his men's ears with wax, but asked to hear the song himself. They tied him to the mast. As they passed, the sirens sang. Odysseus wept and pleaded, desperate to join them. But his men rowed on. The music faded, leaving only the sound of the waves and the creak of the mast. The ropes left marks on his skin, but he was alive. They had passed unharmed. Soon they entered a narrow strait, where two terrors awaited. On one side loomed Scylla, a monster with 6 serpent heads. On the other, Charybdis, a whirlpool that drank the sea and spewed it out again. Odysseus chose the lesser evil. he sailed near Scylla. As they passed, her heads darted down. 6 men were taken, without time for a cry. Odysseus could do nothing but grip the helm and guide them through. Behind them, Charybdis roared, but ahead, the sea calmed once more. At last, they came to the island of Thrinacia, where the sacred cattle of the sun, god Helios, grazed. Odysseus warned his men, do not touch them. For a month, storms kept them stranded. Food ran low. And when Odysseus slept, his men, driven by hunger and despair, killed the cattle. When they left the island, Zeus punished them. A bolt split the sky. The ship shattered. All were lost, save Odysseus. He floated alone, clinging to the wreckage. The sea, endless and empty, carried him on. Days later, he washed up on the island of Ogygia. There lived Calypso, a nymph with a voice like waves and a heart full of longing. She healed him. She offered him a place beside her, forever, even immortality. For 7 years, he stayed, but each day he stood by the shore, staring west. The gods watched, and one day, Hermes came with a message from Zeus. Calypso let him go. She helped him build a raft and watched, silent and sorrowful, as he disappeared into the horizon. Her island faded, but her kindness stayed with him. The sea tossed Odysseus once more, and he might have drowned, but the gods still watched. Poseidon sent storms, but Athena sent help. Odysseus was thrown ashore on the island of the Phaeacians. There he was found by Princess Nausicaa, who brought him to her father, King Alcinous. The Phaeacians welcomed Odysseus. They clothed him, fed him, and asked for his tale. He told it all, from Troy to Circe, the Cyclops, the Sirens, and the dead. As he spoke, the whole grew silent. Even the fire seemed to listen. Alcinous was moved. He gave Odysseus treasures, a new ship, and a promise. We will carry you home. That night, as he slept on soft linens, the sea carried him to Ithaca at last. Odysseus awoke on a beach he did not recognize. Ithaca had changed, or he had. Athena came to him in the guise of a shepherd. She smiled and revealed the truth. Together, they planned his return. She disguised him as a beggar, old, bent, and dusty. He made his way to his palace, walking with slow steps. No one recognized him, but the land did. The cliffs, the trees, the wind, they whispered to him. He was home. Inside the palace, Penelope remained faithful. For 20 years, she had waited. Suitors filled her halls, loud and greedy. They pressed her to choose one. She delayed, weaving a shroud by day and unraveling it at night. Odysseus entered in silence. He saw the suitors, the servants, the shadows of his life. He spoke with his son, now a man. Telemachus listened and believed. Penelope, unaware, announced a final test. Whoever can string my husband's bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads shall be my husband. One by one, the suitors failed. The bow would not bend. Then, the beggar stepped forward. Laughter echoed, but he lifted the bow easily. He strung it. He pulled. The arrow flew straight, true, and perfect. The room froze. Odysseus stood tall, no longer a beggar. The suitors were dealt with. Justice came. Not with rage, but with silence and finality. Penelope, cautious, still tested him. "Tell me of our bed," she said. Odysseus spoke of how it was carved from a living tree, how it could not be moved. Her eyes filled with tears. He was home. And that, dear listener, is where our story rests tonight. Sleep well.